Welcome to the launch of the 24th edition of the Trialogue Business and Society Handbook. Thank you all for joining us. We've had nearly 400 people sign up for today's event. You'll see that there are about 57, 58 participants coming into the call. So as everyone makes their way in, I want to go ahead and launch our first poll. And while you're responding to that, so we can get a sense of which organizations are represented on the call this morning, I'm going to take you through some technical points. Firstly, you'll see that the chat functionality is enabled. You're welcome to post comments throughout the session. However, if you'd like to pose questions to any of the speakers, can I ask that you please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen? We'll respond to as many of those questions as possible during the Q&A session, which will take place after the presentations. Please direct your questions to specific panelists, and please keep your questions as succinct as possible. The session is being recorded, and the notes, the presentation, and the recording will be emailed to everyone who registered after this event. Please use hashtag BIS2021, that's Business and Society, to share your thoughts and insight on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, where you can also find our accounts and follow and engage with us. Thanks very much, everyone, for participating in the poll. We mostly have non-profit organizations on the call, 63%. We've got 16% of business, and then smaller representation of SMEs at 4%, consultants at 11%, and academics at 4%, and then other at 4%. It is still early. We do often see people coming in for the next few minutes. So this is just representation of who we have so far, but thank you for giving us a sense of that. Okay, so to give you a sense of how the morning will run, I'm Zayan Davids. Hello again. I work in the Thought Leadership Division at Trialogue, and I'll be your MC this morning. In a minute, you'll hear from Csi, who's the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues. Kathy Duff will take you through some of the highlights from this year's handbook, and Cornelia will follow this up with a presentation on the key findings from our annual research into the state of corporate social investment in South Africa. Then we're excited to be announcing the winner of this year's Trialogue Strategic CSI Award. Gugu McLaren Oshiwokunze is one of the judges of the award, and she'll make the announcement. And finally, we'll take your questions from the Q&A box at the end of the session, and then we'll end off with some teasers about our plans for next year. For our new friends on the call today, allow me to briefly introduce Trialogue. We're one of only a few consultancies that focuses on responsible business. We do this through advisory, consulting services, and through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which have a vision of making CSI in South Africa more effective. On the knowledge sharing platforms, in addition to this annual handbook, which we'll take you through in quite a bit of detail this morning, we also run an annual conference, which will be held virtually and in person on 10 and 11 May next year. We curate the Knowledge Hub, which is an online repository of best practice and insight about specific developmental topics. And we host monthly CSI webinars virtually, which I hope that you'll all be able to attend at some point through the course of next year. I'd now like to introduce you to our keynote speaker. Csi is the Chief Executive Officer of Business Unity South Africa, an organization which has played a significant role in achieving multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder cooperation through the pandemic. Mr. Kovadia, thank you for writing the foreword for this year's handbook and for being with us this morning. Over to you.
Thank you, and thanks very much for the opportunity and the invitation. I'm going to just, people have read the foreword, and to a certain extent, my input today will be based on that. And I want to concentrate on just your theme, how business can help to build back better, and to build back better is after the devastation of COVID. We have been in the midst of COVID for close on to 2 years now, about 20 months or so, 22 months. And it's been devastating. We all have seen and felt the devastation just at a very human level. We've looked at statistics and data and also felt the devastation to the economy. And we see the devastation on an ongoing basis to communities, to people, to businesses. In April, May, and June 2020, during the time of the initial lockdown, GDP dropped by just over 16%. And if we consider at constant 2010 prices, South Africa generated production in the vicinity of 654 billion rand in the second quarter of 2020. This is the lowest level of production since the first quarter of 2009. So the impact of COVID, the impact of the lockdown, which we as business believe was the appropriate thing to do, by the way, at that time, the initial hard lockdown, has been severe. The economic impact obviously feeds into impact on society, impact on people, jobs, poverty, and so on. And so the broader socioeconomic impact is severe. But we should also note that South Africa was already in recession pre-COVID. And in the early part of COVID, we were downgraded to sub-investment grade status. And we seem to have forgotten that, simply because I think because of COVID, we haven't been out in the market to raise funds in any significant way. But when we do that, we will begin to see the impact of being downgraded into a sub-investment grade country, because the cost of funding will go up, and that will have an impact on our already serious fiscal situation. So while we do want to rebuild the economy and reposition the economy post-COVID, we need to appreciate that the economy was not in great shape pre-COVID. And our aim should not be just to get back to where we were pre-COVID. Our aim should be to reposition the economy so that we actually put it onto a sustainable growth and development path at necessary levels of economic growth, so as to meet the economic and social problems we have in our country. Just some more data on the impact. UNDP did a study on the socioeconomic impact of COVID, and they found that female-headed households were most affected, particularly falling into poverty. Black households were most affected, and we've seen this globally, where communities that are under stress, particularly Black communities, are the most affected by COVID. And this is why COVID has made more stark the fissures we have in our society. We had a loss of between 80,712 jobs and 47,082 jobs in 2020, depending on whether you take a pessimistic or optimistic view on this. Stats South Africa reported that the unofficial unemployment rate increased from 32.6% in the first quarter of 2021 to 34.4% in the second quarter. And this puts our unemployment rate at the highest we've ever seen. Income disparities increase. Stellenbosch University also conducted a study on the impact of hunger and found that hunger and food insecurity had increased from 11% of households in 2019 to 15% during the pandemic. So the overall impact has been severe, but the impact particularly on the poor, on those who had felt the impact of poor economic growth, even pre-COVID, has been even more severe. BUSA, at the beginning of COVID, established a platform called Business for South Africa. It's not a new organization. We started getting calls from corporates and business organizations, some of whom don't even belong to BUSA, to seek guidance on how they deal with COVID. And because we felt that we were getting calls from people even outside of BUSA, we should establish a platform to enable all of business to participate, and hence Business for South Africa. And the intention is to wind down Business for South Africa very soon, actually, as soon as we get the vaccination program more consolidated. But we established Business for South Africa, and we developed an economic recovery strategy that talked to repurposing the economy so that we learn from COVID and build an inclusive and sustainable economy in which most people have a stake. And the issue about ensuring that as many people in the country as possible have a stake in some form or other in a new economy is critical to a sustainable economy that generates sustainable growth. If the majority of the people do not have a stake in the economy, we can't sustain growth, let alone reach growth, but we can't sustain growth. And so it's imperative that we repurpose the economy so that it is meaningful to the majority of our people. COVID has made more stark the fissures in our country and should create a sense of urgency in addressing these fissures. We are of the view that we don't have a sense of urgency yet. I don't know what more we need to have a sense of urgency, but we should begin to appreciate that we urgently need to address these situations. To an extent, all of society united to address the impact of the pandemic last year. Labor, business, government, and community groups found common cause and did sterling work through NEDLAC and still continue to do work. We still meet every Tuesday at the NEDLAC Rapid Response Task Team to discuss what's happening, to discuss joint efforts, collaboration in the vaccination program. The religious community, taxi operators, sports event organizers, and others have worked together to manage the impact and continue to work together now to try and get as many people vaccinated as possible. Business, through the Business for South Africa platform, created specifically and only to manage COVID, mobilized close to 400 experts and professionals on a pro bono basis to assist government in managing the pandemic and developing a post-COVID growth strategy. Business is also supporting government in the vaccine rollout. So I think what COVID has sort of reflected is that business can play a role and does play a good role in supporting government in situations of crisis. And the pro bono support that we've received through the Business for South Africa platform has been amazing. People have worked pro bono last year for close on to most of the year and continued doing their day jobs, but gave a phenomenal amount of time, expertise, and effort to helping manage the pandemic. We've got about 40 people working now on a pro bono basis, supporting the government in rolling out the vaccine. And so I think that this demonstrates the role that business can and should play, not to take over the role of government, because that is not something that we want to do and we should be doing, but certainly to support government in its role in situations like this. This dire situation in our country created by COVID or exacerbated by COVID, because we were in a dire situation pre-COVID, was further exacerbated by the events in July this year, characterized by the president, and I tend to agree with him, as an insurrection. The July events brought further hardship to people and had a devastating impact on the economy, with losses to businesses of up to 20 billion rand in just those 2 weeks or so. And it has been especially severe for small and medium business, with a further impact on jobs. So the July event, beside the reputational risk to the country, beside the political risk to the country, simply exacerbated what COVID created, and exacerbated further the dire situation we were in, even pre-COVID. The recent local government elections also gave a clear indication that people have lost confidence, firstly in the majority party, but even more disturbingly, that we have lost confidence in the structure of our political system, because lots of people just did not vote. And that's a sign that they don't have faith in any political party, and they don't have faith in our political system, because the system just has not delivered, has not improved the lives of too many people. So the country finds itself in what could be said to be a perfect storm. And so we're clearly in crisis, and I think we need to recognize that. This calls for urgency on the part of every sector of society to focus on addressing this crisis. Business must continue playing the role it plays through CSI programs, building businesses and creating jobs. However, the environment for business creation and growth is not conducive. And the levers to create a conducive environment, whether we like it or not, lie with government. Because a lot of those levers lie in the sphere of creating policy certainty, in the sphere of implementing decisions that have already been taken in government, in the sphere of political certainty, and to create an environment where investors have the confidence to come and invest in our country. And South African businesses have the confidence to invest in our country, not just global. And those lie with government. We need clear and decisive leadership from the president, and his cabinet must be aligned behind him. Because one of the problems we have is that the cabinet is not aligned in itself, and certainly not aligned behind the president. And we have mixed messages coming from different ministers and different departments, and that further erodes confidence. And so government needs to sort itself out. The president needs to lead decisively and take the necessary decisions to create the environment for investment. Business and labor also, I think, have a role to play. And we must have pragmatic engagements to see if we can develop some sort of pact between business and labor that is viable and will promote a single view on economic growth and job creation. And we need to have those discussions within the context of an understanding that we don't have too many choices. Lots of people say we're at a crossroads. I'm fond of saying that we're at a T-junction. Crossroads gives us too many choices. I think we're at a T-junction and we have one of two choices, and we'd better make the right choice. We are a minuscule economy in global terms. And so we must stop thinking that we can change the rules of the game in the global economy. At times we do punch above our weight, which is great. But I think that we need to begin to understand that the rules have been set and we have to play within those rules. However, we can play within those rules to attract investment, build an inclusive economy, and begin to address our social, economic, and fiscal crises. Business is quite clear on this, that without the investment and without creating the growth, sustainable growth at the necessary levels, we can't pull ourselves out of the quagmire we are in. So we don't think we should be wasting too much time debating this issue. What we should be talking about is what we need to do to attract the investment. And what we should be talking about is how we build an inclusive and a sustainable economy. Not whether we do that, not whether we should be creating an environment for investment, but how. And then how do we build an inclusive and sustainable economy? And that's the debate, and that's the engagement we should be having. Not talking about whether we want what economic form we want and so on. Those rules have been set, unfortunately or unfortunately. Business has the opportunity, I believe, to lead in this process. And by identifying business opportunities that are not dependent on government pulling the levers. And Busa, at a board meeting last week, we started talking about this. Can we identify critical issues that business can actually go ahead and do on its own? And maybe we'll need government in the last mile of that process. But can we, so for instance, just as an example, can we create a sort of Silicon Valley in Cape Town? And can business do all of the work to actually get that done? And then come to government toward the end for some sort of enabling environment for it. Can we aim to ensure that some of our top universities are in the top 100 in the next 5 years? So stuff that business could do and begin to instill confidence in the country while we continue to talk about some of the broader issues. So I think business has the opportunity to take the lead in that. And we obviously need to continue to engage government on the levers they need to pull and on influencing government to play the role that they now must play. And we, ongoing discussions, ongoing engagement with the president and others in that. I also believe that we must lead in initiatives to address the impact of climate change and putting us on a plan to cleaner and greener forms of energy. I spent a few days at COP26 a couple of weeks ago. And the impact of climate change and the potential impact if we don't actually address this and if we don't move from fossil fuel-based energy to cleaner energy. The potential impact on the global economy is phenomenal. And so so from a business point of view, we need to lead in this, because if we don't get this right, the impact on GDP is going to be severe. If we do this right and we get it right, I think there are significant economic opportunities in moving from our current forms of energy to newer and cleaner and greener forms of energy. And I was quite gratified, actually, at the confidence shown in South Africa, because South Africa, as an emerging country, has done work on renewables, although we need to do a lot more. Our ambitions are quite high in moving to zero emissions. We're doing quite a lot of work on a just transition pathway, which is critical to moving from fossil fuel-based energy to cleaner energy. And we signed this deal with the EU, UK, and the US, $8.5 billion over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think that, and in meetings I had at COP, the view is that South Africa, if we get this right in South Africa, it will set an example for other emerging countries. But we need to do a lot of work here. We need to put projects on the table. viable projects that can inform the negotiations on unlocking the funds that have been committed. And I think business has a critical role to play in that and should play a critical role in that. So the whole issue about climate change, issue about what we mean by sustainable business in the broadest terms is critical. And talking about sustainable business, I think we must also ensure that we conduct our business in a manner that is sustainable, which includes protection of the environment, but also contributes to the growth and development of communities in which we work. And this is not because we might be nice people or because there's a political or human or moral imperative to do so, but it's investing in your future market. As communities grow, as there's upward mobility in communities, the demand for goods that business produces increases. Demands for services that business is developing increases. And so it's very much in our interest to do that, and we must do that. Finally, let me just make a plea in the current circumstances. We are experiencing a serious drop in demand for vaccinations. In the early stages, we had a supply side problem. We now have a demand side problem. We've got the supply. Businesses must pull out all stops to enable staff to vaccinate and assist in getting people in communities around their businesses to vaccinate, as must others, non-profit organizations, the religious organizations, sports bodies, everybody. This is probably the single most important thing for our country right now. And getting as many people vaccinated as soon as possible is the most effective weapon against COVID-19. And we are pulling out all stops, encouraging businesses to do this. Some businesses are applying mandatory vaccination policies. There's a lot of debate around this, but businesses have a responsibility to ensure safe workplaces for all employees. And the OHS regulation enables them to actually apply some form of mandatory vaccination. But that also begins to get the demand going. And so we need to look at various ways and means through our organization, through our networks, to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So let's play a leading role in this. Thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kovadia, for that sobering reminder of the crucial need for multi-sectoral cooperation to build an inclusive and sustainable economy and a greener society. And thank you also for your responsiveness to the challenges of the pandemic through business for South Africa. I would now like to hand over to Trialogue Director Kathy Duff to take you through some highlights from this year's Business and Society Handbook. Kathy, over to you.
Thanks, Csi, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again to launch this 24th edition of our Business and Society Handbook. The theme of the handbook this year, as Mr. Kovadia has spoken about, is building back better. And it looks at the role of the private sector in helping to rebuild after the pandemic, also after the unrest that we experienced as a country. Once again, we partnered this year with the Lockdown Collection for all the artwork in the handbook, and the artwork that you see behind us all and on the screen is from the Lockdown Collection. So I'd like to thank them for partnering with us again. The Lockdown Collection the sale of the artworks raises funds for the Vulnerable Artists Fund, and last year they raised over 2.5 million and made over 500 small grants to vulnerable artists and art students. So before I go into just a brief overview of the handbook, I wanted to thank everyone involved in getting this production done. Firstly, to all of you companies and nonprofits that participated in our primary research, thank you. I know the surveys are long, we do them every year, but we really rely on that data and it forms the bedrock of the handbook. So thank you for that. Then I'd like to thank all the companies that participated in the handbook in terms of adverts, advertorials, and case studies. Thanks for sharing your insights, for sharing information about your program, and for making the handbook viable. We thank you for that. There's also a number of article authors in the audience that I've seen, some from various organizations, and I'd like to thank them for their invaluable expert contributions. And last but definitely not least, to the Trialogue team, thanks once again. This handbook really does take the entire year to put together, and almost everyone at Trialogue is involved in one way or another. So thanks to the full team, and special mention to Fiona, who was this year's managing editor. Thank you. To Kumo, who was the production manager on the handbook for the first time this year and has managed everything so seamlessly and with a smile. Thank you. And to Lorato, who many of you would have dealt with about your participation in the handbook. Thank you. So I'm going to briefly, I'm going to launch a poll now just to get a sense of how, if at all, you use the annual Trialogue Business in Society handbook. So you'll see the poll should be up on your screen now. And while you're responding to that, I just want to talk you briefly through what this year's edition covers. It's broken into 6 main chapters and then supplemented with some insights from our conference and from our webinars. The first chapter focuses on the detailed findings of our primary research. I'm not going to speak to that now because my colleague Cornelia will be going through the highlight of the findings afterwards. Chapter 2 moves on to the development sectors, and in this chapter we go into a bit more detail on the 12 development sectors that we track as part of our research. It contains national statistics on government spend in these areas, as well as what some of the issues are. It then contains the research on the corporate allocation to each sector of CSI funds, and it contains a short study, a short case study aligned to the theme of building back better. Chapter 3 then has 8 in-depth company case studies, and thank you to those 8 companies for contributing case studies this year that consider one or more of their projects and really focus on the learnings and insights from those programs. Chapter 4, which I'm going to speak a little bit more about after this, we're including for the first time this year, and that chapter is called Responsible Business. So some of you may be aware, this handbook used to be called the CSI Handbook, and in 2017, we actually changed the name to the Business and Society Handbook to reflect the broader role of business and society. And each year since 2017, we've included some research questions and some articles looking at responsible business issues outside of CSI. This year, we've pulled those together into a chapter, and I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the articles, and it's a chapter that we look at developing further in the coming years, and we want to do some further research in those areas as well. The 5th chapter looks at how how to build back various sectors of society in the coming years. So it kicks off with an article on transformation of the development sector. And this article, I think, well worth a read, looks at how you as nonprofits, we saw a large portion of our audience as nonprofits and corporates can transform your own organizations. What are you doing to transform your organization and to ensure that smaller community-based organizations in South Africa are viable? It then has articles on rebuilding the education system. Thank you to Xenex Foundation for that. We have some Xenex colleagues in the audience, so thanks for that. Rebuilding the health system, and Dr. Nicholas Crisp authored that article. Rebuilding the food security and agriculture system. And also a very timely and important article by 2 colleagues, I see some of them are in the audience, from the National Business Initiative on how companies can address gender-based violence. I think a particularly pertinent issue in our country. So that's chapter 5, and then the book closes off with chapter 6, which focuses on the nonprofit sector. Here we start with statistics from our nonprofit primary research. We look at nonprofit income, what's happened to it through the pandemic. We look at sources of income, fundraising, There's then some articles that look at resilience for the nonprofit sector and that look at collaboration and have some case studies. And I think excitingly also, this chapter profiles the winners of our 2 nonprofit award programs that we ran this year with partners. So the first one was the MTN Social Award for Change, which focuses on monitoring and evaluation practices. And the second one was the Nedbank Private Wealth Innovation Award, which focused on resilience and innovation through the pandemic. And finally, the book closes off with a directory of nonprofits, a list of nonprofits with some basic details on them. And further details can be found on the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. Okay, I'm going to end this poll, which has been running while I spoke through that. And it's nice to see a fairly even split, with most respondents saying, they use the handbook to learn more about CSI in South Africa and read the articles to get better insights. Quite a large number, and I'm imagining this is the nonprofits in the audience, to identify potential funders, and 45% using the statistics and research to inform their CSI programs. So that's great news. And I just want to also say that this early next year, we'll be running a very short survey on the handbook to get your feedback on this year's edition and to provide ideas of what you would like to see in future editions of the handbook. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that responsible business chapter. I know you probably can't read this, it doesn't matter, it is in the handbook, but it's just to introduce the concept. This is the kind of definition diagram that we included back in the 2019 edition of the handbook, and which you can find in that edition, or you can find it on the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. And it just shows that corporate social investment, which is on the bottom left of this wheel, is one subset of what we call here corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility here is defined as the entire social impact of a business. This includes its impact on its employees and all its employee programs and well-being programs. It includes a company's impact on its supply chain, the marketplace, on enterprise development, and then on communities via CSI. So CSI, one subset of that CSR, and CSR in turn, one subset of responsible business, together with environmental responsibility and governance. So you've got your E for the environmental, your social, and your governance. So what this chapter 4 focuses on is some of the responsible business issues outside of CSI. So the chapter kicks off, and I'm just going to give you a taste of a few of the articles before we move on to the numbers for this year. But the chapter kicks off with an article on integrated thinking by Trialogue's Managing Director, Nick Rocky. Now, there's lots of different terms for responsible business. Corporate citizenship, inclusive capitalism, ESG. We use the term integrated thinking to refer to the integration of environmental, social, and governance issues in every aspect of the business, including in core business strategy. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware of integrated reports, and you probably have some role in providing information to those in your company. I mean, ideally, how the process should work is that integrated thinking should come first, and ESG issues should be embedded throughout the organization. And then integrated reporting should report on the progress of that thinking and practice. I think oftentimes in reality, we find that it works a little bit the other way around, with the reporting coming first. So Trialogue has developed an integrated thinking framework, and this article outlines that framework, which provides a kind of progressive and intuitive approach to embedding ESG issues through the organization. It includes a gap analysis, and it ends with a roadmap of actions to take or towards a more integrated business. So that, I think, sets the scene for the chapter by looking at how to incorporate material environmental, social governance issues into your business strategy. Another article I wanted to touch on briefly is Climate in the Boardroom. This is authored by Justin Smith and Louise Naudet at WWF. And it looks at how directors and trust and board members, I know we've got a lot of nonprofits in the audience, need to urgently upskill on climate issues. So climate change really is the defining issue of our generation. And Mr. Kuvadia mentioned it. I'm sure you're all aware of COP26, which happened in Glasgow. But there's so much going on in this area, and countries, cities, and many, many companies and organizations have committed to net zero. So what does that mean? And what does it mean for your organization? And does your board understand what that means? What this article shows is that in South Africa and globally, directors actually have very little understanding of climate change and the risks and opportunities, the science behind it, and the impact on the business. So there is an urgent need for upskilling in this space. There's also increasing investor, shareholder activist pressure in this. So this article takes you through some of this research. It looks at some of the risks and opportunities, and then it points you in the direction of some practical resources for your organization. Some of these are provided by WWF that they've created for businesses, and others, and there's some resources provided by the National Business Initiative on climate as well. Alongside this article, there's a short viewpoint by Trialogue's Nicole Martins, which looks at transitioning to net zero. So what does that mean for companies? What does it mean for organizations in South Africa? And how do you start thinking about that transition and shifting your business model to a net zero economy? Okay, the last article I just want to touch on is Business and Human Rights, authored by the Handbook's managing editor, Fiona Zurbs. This is another issue where the World Economic Forum feels this needs to be sitting at board level, like climate change, and yet it's not. The private sector has a very poor track record when it comes to human rights. And in fact, there's the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, which is a global benchmark of large companies around the world. And 3 South African multinationals were found to be some of the worst performers in terms of their human rights performance. So again, this article lays out some of that research. It lays out the business case for why it's so important for companies to consider human rights and to embed them in the organization. And then it provides some practical steps for how to get there through, and it looks at various resources that are available to companies to help them integrate human rights considerations across the organization. Okay, so I hope that's given you a little taster of some of the content of the handbook outside of the data and statistics. I'm going to launch one last poll now just to get a sense of where your organizations are in terms of embedding environmental, social, and governance issues into the organization. And this is actually a question that we asked in the primary research. So I can look at these results that we get and compare them to what we found in our research. But just to finish off by just reflecting on this broader role, and I think Mr. Kuvadia spoke so well to it as well, how it's crucial that business contributes in terms of job creation, CSI, and beyond that, not just to kind of build the nation, but also in the self-interest of business and its future customers. So CSI is a good entry point for responsible business and responsible business conversation, but it's just one of many responsibilities, and hopefully that will illustrated just how diverse those responsibilities are. For us, integrated thinking goes well beyond CSI, and it makes far greater demands on the business. It also needs to be driven from the top and needs to ensure this responsible business agenda is driven at a board and executive level. So what can you do as your organization, and how can you start on this kind of journey? I guess companies should start by looking at what they can do internally around equitable employment, fair wages, inequality, gender equity, inclusive workforces. What's your company doing around its products and services in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness, and what more can be done there? What's your company doing around its supply chain transformation and enabling access to small and medium businesses, which are really the drivers of growth and which have suffered in this last year during the pandemic? There's a couple of articles and viewpoints on that as well. And then consider some of the ways that your company can help to address some of the larger issues in society and contribute towards nation building. So how can your company support the functioning of government? How can it support the fight for social justice? How can it support or address the scourge of violence in our country? And as I mentioned, we do have a great article on what companies can do to address gender-based violence. How can your company look at addressing youth unemployment figures? These issues are all huge issues that can no longer be ignored. And what we hope is that this handbook provides some useful insights on these issues and how to start thinking about them. I'm going to end that poll and share the results. And the results are actually very similar to what we found in our primary research, in that most respondents, and here 44%, feel that ESG will be truly integrated throughout the company in the next 2 to 5 years. And I think this is good news. It's been a long time coming, and I think in the last year and a half, between the pandemic, climate change, the unrest, there's been so many drivers really pushing this integration of ESG into business. So I hope that you found the handbook useful and interesting this year. As mentioned, we will be running a short survey early next year, which we'd like you to participate in. And just thank you once again to all of you that participated in the research and in the handbook. I'm going to hand over now to Zayan. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kathy. A reminder to everyone to please pop any questions you may have into the Q&A box and to please direct it to the relevant speaker. We'll work our way through these towards the end of the session. I'd now like to hand over to Cornelia Blegnot. She's a consultant at Trialogue, and she focuses on sustainability and integrated reporting. Cornelia, please take us through some of the key findings from this year's CSI research. Hi.
Good morning, and thank you, Zee, for that. So yes, Trialogue has been tracking CSI expenditure in South Africa for almost a quarter of a century. And today it's my pleasure to share our 2021 findings with everyone on the call. So the one big thing that everyone always looks to the handbook for is our estimated CSI expenditure, which amounted to 10.3 billion in the year under review. So this estimate is based on an analysis of the expenditure of listed South African companies, multinationals operating in South Africa, and state-owned enterprises, and it includes cash and non-cash giving. So our analysis takes several factors into account. Firstly, we consider year-on-year changes in CSI expenditure of 121 listed companies, as well as the net profit after tax of 201 listed companies using publicly reported data. We also consider year-on-year changes in CSI expenditure as disclosed or reported by 40 companies that participated in Trialogue's 2021 corporate research for 2 consecutive years. So in addition to those key elements that we look at, we also look at SARS data of total company taxable income and tax paid in comparison to CSI expenditure or expected CSI expenditure based on net PAT. So as a comparison of the combined CSI expenditure of the top 100 companies, so we also take into account a comparison of the combined CSI expenditure of the top 100 companies and an analysis of how much of the total market they represent. And finally, we also look at small and medium companies and their expected CSI expenditure in South Africa. So all of these, factors are taken into account at getting to our 10.3 billion big number. And you'll note that in 2021, our CSI estimate showed a 4% decrease from the previous year. And in real terms, that actually amounts to negative growth of 7.3%, which shows a very sharp decline this year. So in our research, we found that the net profit after tax, or the NPAT of 201 listed companies, showed a median increase of 19.4%. This reflects a recovery in net PAT in 2021, albeit off a low base from 2020. So this is an important factor to consider when looking at this year's big number, because CSI budgets are often determined as a percentage of net PAT, and it's based on the performance of the previous financial year, which results in a lag between the current net PAT performance and budgeted CSI spend. Considering that large companies, or companies in general, showed large declines in profits in 2020, driven in large part by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, a reduction in CSI expenditure in 2021 is therefore not unexpected. So increased corporate profitability in 2020, as shown through net PAT, is anticipated to have a positive impact on CSI budgets in future. So our findings actually contrast findings from the United States, where total community investment showed unprecedented growth as companies attempted to alleviate the negative effects of the pandemic. So in 2020, we also saw that the three top contributing sectors remained the same as in previous years, with basic materials accounting for 33% of CSI expenditure. The consumer services sector was second largest in this, with 27%. And this was due in large part to the donation of products from the sector. The financial services sector was the third largest contributor, accounting for 22% of CSI expenditure. So overall, CSI expenditure remained concentrated within the top 100 companies in our research, and they accounted for 68%, or nearly 7 billion of that big 10.3 billion that we estimate. So I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the 69 corporates who took part in our corporate survey. This year, we noted that for the first time, just over half of respondents, or 51%, reported a decrease in CSI expenditure. This is a continuation of a downward trend over the past 4 years. So the main reason that companies cited for this decrease was actually a change in corporate profits. So nearly a third of corporates surveyed reported non-cash giving in 2021. This is up from only 19% of companies reporting non-cash giving 11 years ago. In expenditure terms, non-cash giving as a proportion of the total CSI investment accounted for 13% of expenditure. So where increases in CSI expenditure have occurred, it's been driven by non-cash donations. It's, however, important to note that inconsistencies in how companies quantify and disclose non-cash expenditure as part of their CSI spend is likely not providing us with a true reflection of non-cash expenditure. Non-cash expenditure in South Africa is significantly lower than in the US, where as much as 22% of expenditure is non-cash. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, and now looking at the different development sectors supported, education was once again the most popular corporate cause supported by the and though that seems high, it is significantly lower than the average of 50% of spend on education recorded last year. This is due to increased support for food security and agriculture, which increased to 10% this year, as well as disaster relief, which is up from 4% last year to 9% this year. So for the first time, we can see that food security and agriculture was the third most supported sector, demonstrating the impact the pandemic has had on sector expenditure. So social and community development, you'll see, has remained the second most supported sector, with 74% of corporates funding it, and with 17% of total CSI spend going towards that sector. I'd also like to just thank our NPO respondents who took part in our NPO survey. All 121 of you who participated, we really do appreciate your inputs. So in line with previous years, NPOs were the most likely recipients of CSI funding, with 87% of companies directing 53% of their CSI spend to NPOs. Government institutions was the next most common recipient, funded by 71% of corporates, receiving 24% of companies' CSI spend on average. So most NPOs in this sample received an average of 28% of NPO income in the past financial year. It's also interesting to note that companies supported many projects, with 60% supporting more than 10 projects and nearly a third supporting more than 50 projects, which is quite high. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so next, I'd like to just take us through some interesting, yeah, there we go, some interesting findings that relate to volunteering. So in 2021, more than 2/3 of companies had volunteering programs, of which 67% had one or more person appointed to manage volunteerism. So the majority of companies with employee volunteering programs supported company organized volunteering initiatives, fundraising or collection drives, as well as time off for individuals during work hours to participate. These initiatives also had very high employee participation rates. So companies also indicated in our research that the digital trend influenced their volunteering programs, with 18% reporting new online volunteering programs and 28% indicating that existing volunteering programs have shifted online. Notably, unfortunately, more than a quarter of companies and NPOs said that the COVID-19 pandemic, that is, resulted in volunteering programs ceasing or being put on hold in 2021. So this year we were also very excited to do some research with volunteers for the first time. So we did a survey with almost 500 employees from 8 companies in partnership with For Good. So over 3/4 of respondents from this survey did not volunteer in 2020. But this is, in terms of people who did volunteer, we found that volunteering had a positive impact on employees' participation or perception of companies, with 9 out of 10 volunteers saying that their company's commitment to the community made them proud to work at that company. Volunteering also had benefits not just for the volunteers, for the recipients of volunteering, but it also had a positive impact on volunteers, with 62% of volunteers agreeing that they had developed skills to apply in their jobs through volunteering. So those are just some interesting findings from our volunteering. Next, we can move on to our top ranked companies. So as part of our survey annually, we ask corporates to rank other corporates or their peers in terms of their contribution or their CSI programs. And we also ask NPOs to do the same. So this year, we are glad to share these highly anticipated rankings. So firstly, congratulations to all companies who made it onto the list in 2020, but a special congratulations to Vodacom, who was ranked first by companies for the 5th consecutive year. Vodacom was also ranked in the top 5, or has been ranked in the top 5 since 2012. And also remains in the top 5 as ranked by NPOs, down from their first place spot last year. So that first place spot is now taken up by FirstRand from an NPO perspective, improving from their 10th place position in 2019. So that's really a fantastic movement. And then the company was ranked first by NPOs, up from its 5th place in 2020. So a fantastic gradual shift there from FirstRand. So yes, that's all from my side, and thank you for the opportunity to share these findings with everyone on the call. Thank you once again for everyone who participated, and congratulations to those corporates who ranked high.
Thanks so much, Cornelia. We encourage you to delve into this research in more detail by heading over to our website, trialogue.co.za. Straight after the session, you'll be able to access a copy of the handbook. You can either order a hard copy if you don't expect to receive one, or you can download a complimentary copy, a digital version. I do also just want to remind you that you can pop questions into the Q&A box. I do see that there are a number directed at Mr. Kovadia. Unfortunately, he's had to leave us. He had to attend a board meeting at 10 o'clock, so he's not going to be able to respond. I do apologize for that. But Kathy and Cornelia can respond to insight around the handbook. And I would now like to invite one of the 3 judges of this year's Trialogue Strategic CSI Award to tell you more about the award and to announce the winner of this year's award. Gugu McLaren Oshiwakunzi heads the Social Transformation Program at the National Business Initiative. Hi, Gugu. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And good morning to the other Trialogue colleagues and everybody on the call. And I hope that you've all had an insightful session so far. It is my honor to be sharing with you feedback and the findings from the Trialogue Strategic CSI Award as one of the judges, and giving you some insight into that award and the approach that we take. I'm giving the feedback on behalf of the judges. This year, there were 3 judges, myself, along with Becky Nkosi Moyo, who is an adjunct professor at Wits Business School, and the director of the Center of African Philanthropy and Social Investment. He is also previously the CEO of South African Trust, and has done extensive work in the space of social entrepreneurship, sustainability, strategy, and social change. So a really fantastic addition to the judging panel this year. This was his first year, along with Anthony Wilson Prangley, who has been a judge for many years and comes with a lot of experience with judging this particular award, but also through his work in social change at Gibbs, where he has helped to build the Center of Leadership and Dialogue at Gibbs. And so, yeah, we were very honored to judge this award. And I think what was quite pertinent for us in this year's one was the context in which we were doing the judging. Obviously, we've heard a lot today about the impact of the COVID pandemic and how this has exacerbated our social issues and challenges and our issues around inequality and exclusion and inequity. And so, you know, when we were looking at all the different projects and programs, we had this in mind in really thinking about the impact that is needed and the impact that a lot of companies are working towards through their CSI. And I want to just start by saying that this particular award is very specific. And you'll know, for those who have followed Trialogue's work and have engaged with Trialogue and the handbook, you know that they have developed a matrix for CSI that looks at the different approaches to CSI. These include charitable grant making, developmental CSI, commercial grant making, and strategic CSI. All of these are important. All of these are required and needed to deal with the social issues that we face as a country. This award, however, specifically focuses on strategic CSI. And I'll share a bit about what that means. And so it's not to say that the companies that didn't make it aren't doing incredible and important work. It's to say there is a very specific way of understanding strategic CSI, and that was the job of us as judges to understand that. And so from a judging perspective, we look for companies that have very clear objectives when it comes to their CSI, and that these objectives are SMART. So as you know, that stands for specific, measurable, relevant, and time-bound. So we are very interested in how companies understand the issue, how they have thought through the intervention or the investment that they're making, and how they are measuring the impact. And so those are some of the key criteria that we look for in the judging. And what's important for us as well is how, in this thinking through, the investments that companies are making are linked to the business. And so there's a clear link between what the business is, the services and the products, and what this investment is. And so that link becomes very important in our review, and how companies are able to then detail the impact, social impact, and the business impact as well. And so that's the framing for how we judge these awards. There is a comprehensive judging framework that we use. And as the judges, we go away and we review all of the applications that we receive independently. And we come back and we discuss those and agree what we think the companies are that have really shown a deep understanding for strategic CSI. And I'll say that this year we were very impressed by, firstly, the range of work that companies are doing in this space, and also just the level of detail and thought that went into the applications. It did make it a bit challenging because we had a whole number of really fantastic projects that we had to review and scrutinize in order to get to the one that would win this year's award. And so before I go into announcing that, I do want to share with you some of the projects that we thought did fantastically well and are making an incredible impact as the commendable projects. And just to say that the detail around these projects are included in the handbook if you do want to understand a little more around what some of these projects are doing. And so I'll share with you those before I go on and announce the winner of this year's award. The first is Anglo-American Platinum's Mogala Kwena's water project, which really focuses on the goal of ensuring that in this particular community, everyone has access to clean water. And so we know that particularly from a mining company perspective, the community surrounding the operations is a critical stakeholder, and also understanding the water issues we have in this country. And so this project really looks at how you ensure that the community has access. And so we highlighted this as one of the commendable projects. We also highlighted ShopRite Group's Retail Readiness Program and Yes for Youth. This addresses one of our most major social challenges within South Africa, our challenge of youth unemployment. And this really is a program that looks to provide skills and training for young people, and then to integrate them into ShopRite's business. So a really clever, thought through mechanism for providing opportunities and employability for young people. Further to this, we had Eskom's Expo for Young Scientists. So again, this is around thinking future-wise, focusing on young leaders, as well as thinking through the skills that are required for the future. And so this Young Scientist program really looks at how you instill a sense of innovation and research in young people through this expo. And then lastly is Growth Point's Grow Smart educational program, which is an internally focused program that looks at, my apologies. It's a program that looks at issues of literacy, maths and science, working within the Western Cape. And again, it's around recognizing where there are gaps and how you can think through ways to address this through different ways. So they use a competition way of engaging young people in this space. And so a really fantastic number of projects. And I think when you go through the detail, you'll see just how thoughtful many companies are being in the investments that they make. And I think what's also critical to highlight is the importance of the measurement of it. And so as judges, we are looking for how the impact is measured, how it is verified, and how we can trust the outcomes of any of these projects that are put in front of us. But we all agreed that there was a very clear winner. And the reason for that was, it was very clear in this project, the thoughtfulness, the understanding of how the company and the business can utilize its experience, its resourcing, and its capacity to deal with a very fundamental health issue. And that in this case relates to health. And so the winner of the Trialogue Strategic CSI Award for 2021 is Imperial Logistics Unjani Clinics. So please join me in congratulating Imperial for that. And just a little bit of background to this project. And as I mentioned, it really showcases what strategic CSI is about. The aim of the program is to provide health facilities to the most marginalized and the most excluded people and communities within the country. And it's really around taking Imperial's logistical experience, networks, and infrastructure to allow this to happen and to reach these communities to provide much needed healthcare. And this healthcare includes management of patients on antiretroviral treatment, wellness screening, antenatal care, and a whole host of other things. It's a huge amount of investment that Imperial has made in this space, and I think really focuses and targets those in need. And I think what's also, from a judging point of view, was really interesting was that this program provides insights and learnings for aspects of Imperial business's growth and future plans in the health logistics space. So very much a clear link between the business and the social impact and need. And so I hope that you will take the time to read more around this particular project. And I do believe there is someone from Imperial who will be talking about the program. But from a judging perspective, we would like to say, firstly, thank you to all the companies who put in their applications. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of detail that's required when doing the application. So thank you very much to the companies who have put in the time and effort to do that. Congratulations to the commendable projects, but in particular, congratulations to Imperial. And we hope that your Unjani clinics continues to grow and continues to address a huge gap and need within our society. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gugu, and congratulations again to Imperial Holdings for the important work that you're doing through Unjani clinics. So Kumo is managing the back-end logistics of this event, and she's just upgraded Lauren Rota, who's from Imperial, from a guest to a panelist. So Lauren, if you're comfortable, can we ask you to put on your camera? If you're not, you can leave it off. But we would love to hear a few words from you, just about how you're feeling about the recognition that Unjani Clinics is getting. Hi, Lauren.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just sorting out
connection problems.
Congratulations, Lauren. Can you hear us? Hi.
I can. Thank you. This is such wonderful recognition for a project that is very dear to our business. We've walked a very long journey with Unjani Clinics and have seen this initiative grow from strength to strength. They have a target for this year to achieve 100 clinics being rolled out by what we call nursepreneurs. So trained nurses who are also upskilled in running and managing their own businesses through the clinics, and being very stalwart representatives in their communities and providing excellent service at very fair cost to their communities for primary healthcare. And what we find, we are so passionate about this project, is that it demonstrates that the private sector can play a meaningful role in affordable, quality private healthcare. So we feel that this is a very transformational project, and we are delighted to be a partner with them. The Unjani model is such that any other company that wishes to sponsor is welcome to come on board. They have a vision to grow this to a far larger network of clinics. So there's an open invitation always from our Unjani Clinics partners to bring other sponsors on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and congratulations again. I want to echo that, firstly, your call to partners, but then also just the reminder that the private sector can play such a crucial role in affordable and quality healthcare. Thank you again for your work, and thank you, Gugu. We've got just a few minutes left to take some of your questions. And I just want to jump ahead. I do see that there are one or two in the box, but we did receive a question or a few questions from a journalist earlier. And so, Kathy, I'm going to direct two of them to you. The journalist was asking about how nonprofit organizations coping with limited funding as a result of COVID, how they're coping, and for those who rely on external funding, and when that funding runs out, so many of them are forced to close, how can they become more self-sustainable in the long term?
Thanks, Diane, and thanks for that question. Yes, quite hopefully, actually, we found in our primary research that there was a kind of mixed response on nonprofit income. So it wasn't all bad news, and a number of nonprofits had actually increased their income in the last year. But what we did see, what Cornelia presented, is that corporate social investment spend did decline, and I know that for some nonprofits, this could have a big impact. I think there's a number of things to consider here, and the first is really the diversification of income streams. And again, you will have seen from Cornelia's presentation that almost 30% on average of the nonprofits we surveyed of their income comes from corporates. So it's not the majority of the income, and it is the single biggest source, but there's a number of other sources for that income. And I think, you know, that diversification of income streams is so important. One of the findings that we didn't present, but which we asked corporates about, was their willingness to fund different types of initiatives and different funding mechanisms. And we found that the majority of corporates are actually very willing to fund nonprofits to set up some kind of income generation programs. So, and I know this is not suitable for all organizations, but it is something worth considering and something that we see there's quite an appetite from the corporates to help with. And I think this Imperial and Johnny Clinics just gives us such a good example of actually a social enterprise. So something that started as a pilot within corporate social investment with grant funding, but now these clinics really are enterprises and sustain themselves. So again, not relevant to all nonprofits, but certainly a model to look at, along with diversification of income streams. And I think there's a very useful article for all the nonprofits written by our partners at the Rios Foundation around nonprofit resilience. And that really speaks to the strength of relationships, building relationships all the time basis, so that when a crisis hits, those relationships and those strong partnerships are in place and can sustain the business. So I would point you in the direction of that article as well. Thanks, Csi.
Thanks very much, Kathy. Malipo, I see you raising your hand. Can I ask you to pop your question into the Q&A box, please? And we'll respond to that as best we can. And then Kathy, while I've got you, sorry, I didn't get the name of the person who was asking the question. Let me just check. It's Solomon Corsi is asking, what effects the new BEE codes, I'm assuming the sector-specific codes, has on companies and how they select their CSI programs or projects, especially since there seems to be a more emphasis on the difference between CSI and SED.
Thanks, Solomon. Yeah, I think the kind of biggest impact that we've seen from the codes on CSI is firstly around the magnitude of funding. So more and more companies use the guideline of 1% of net profit after tax. You know, prior to the codes, companies did not use that as a basis for determining their budgets. So firstly, it's the magnitude, and secondly, it's the quantification. So companies now recording and quantifying cash as well as non-cash giving. In terms of how they select their programs, I think we've seen slightly less of an impact. And I do hear what you're saying about the difference between CSI and SED and the real focus on economic inclusion and growing businesses. So, but I think, you know, a lot of this can include education. And once again, you will have seen from Cornelia's presentation, most corporates are funding education programs. It's the biggest area of expenditure. And we've seen more companies become more strategic in their giving. So they've become more focused and they select projects and programs that fit in with their strategy. And, you know, on this basis, we haven't seen the codes really determining which projects or programs they select. It's more been helpful in a guideline on the magnitude of spending, in how to quantify that spending. But I think then the main thing that's determining which projects and programs companies are funding is in fact their strategies and the alignment to the business.
Thanks very much, Kathy. Okay, so I think that's it for questions for the moment. We're coming. Sorry, there's one more question here from Shane Perea. Do you know what the extent of duplication of efforts by corporate over NPOs, example, corporates having the, okay. So duplication, Kathy, the question from Shane is around duplication between corporates and NPOs, corporates having their own bursary programs versus NPOs offering them. What's the extent of duplication? Also, I suppose, what are some of the implications around that?
Thanks, Shane. If I understand your question, I mean, I don't think, particularly in bursary programs, that we see too much duplication. Bursary programs are obviously all target a pool of students and usually different students for different bursary programs. I think corporates run them in different ways. So some corporates do run their own bursary programs, as you mentioned, while others might use nonprofits to manage and administer their bursary programs. So for me, it's a difference in how they manage those bursary programs rather than duplicating the effort. I mean, we do still hear and see, I guess, across the sector, both nonprofits and corporates, some duplication in programs and projects, and a call for greater collaboration, which is something that we always support and encourage. And there are a few case studies. There's a particularly nice case study in the handbook in that nonprofit chapter on collaboration in the food security sector after the pandemic hit. There's a nice case study on how nonprofits and business and government try to reduce that duplication and work closer together. And there's been a number of questions coming in around access to the handbook. The link is now live, so you can download it for free from our website. We will be sending hard copies to everyone. And I think you said Malipo had their hand up, Csi, and they were asking about whether nonprofits can participate in that award process. The strategic CSI award process is for companies. It's quite a specific award process with specific criteria, as Gugu mentioned, so there has to be a business benefit. But I mentioned briefly up front that in this past year, well, this year in 2021, we actually ran 2 nonprofit award processes with our corporate partners. So there's the MTN Award for Social Change. This focuses on nonprofit monitoring and evaluation. And then this year there was the Nedbank Private Wealth Innovation and Resilience Awards. So there are other award processes for nonprofits, and you can find out details about those as well as who this year's winners were in the handbook. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. That is all the time we have for questions. We're coming to the end of our time together this morning. Just to reiterate what Kathy has already mentioned, we will be couriering hard copies of the handbook and a desk calendar to everyone who participated in the book. Thank you again for your insight and your participation. We also do encourage you to head over to our website, trialogue.co.za, to download a complimentary copy. And as we begin to recalibrate after 2 years of virtual contact and remote working and webinars from home to hundreds of people under tremendously challenging conditions for so many, in 2022, we aim as Trialogue to emphasize the need for reconnection with our personal purpose, with our collective potential, and with our natural environment. I'd really like to invite you all to get in touch with us if you'd like to be part of this reconnection next year. Let's discuss how you can share your organization's good work and key lessons in development through our handbook, on our knowledge hub, in our CSI webinar that we host, or possibly at our annual conference, which is scheduled for 10 and 11 May next year. Also, do look out for the Trialogue Academy, which will launch early next year, offering online and combination training on a range of CSI and development issues. Well done, colleagues, all of us for making it through another immensely challenging and unpredictable year. May we continue to rebuild together and better in 2022. And on behalf of the Trialogue team, I'd like to wish you all a safe, peaceful, and a replenishing festive season. Thank you for your time this morning, and do get in touch. Bye-bye, everyone.